Now, Deadlock's laning phase can seem rather straightforward, pushing minions, getting the Guardian, and then roaming to the next stage of the game. But what if I told you there's a lot more factors you have to start considering when you're in laning phase? Talking wave priority, freezing waves, rotating properly, and much more. My name's Doug Films, and I've coached and played a lot of Deadlock, as well as the current team analyst for Rose Syndicate. And here's everything that you need to know about the laning phase. So let's go ahead and, talk about the laning phase. So when it comes to the laning phase, a lot of stuff is determined about what you're building and buying in lane. A lot of different factors. For instance, you have an Abrams Apollo lane versus a Shiv Dynamo. Shiv does a lot of poke. Apollo does a lot of poke, and he wants to fight early because of his disengaging sigil. It does a lot of damage. Abrams is a rather, semi-tanky character in the start, so you can pressure Dynamo and Shiv pretty decently. The idea here is that characters like a Shiv, like a Dynamo, might want to be thinking about items like extra regen, because you want to be able to out-sustain the enemies. He has a built-in sustain, and he just does a lot of poke damage. Whereas, for instance, a lane as in mid lane, a Mina Wraith versus a Lash Ven is probably going to be looking to buy Restorative Shot, because each minion he shoots, he gets plus 20 healing, and each enemy player he shoots, he gains plus 30 or whatever added, and it's a little bit better than extra regen, so you would probably look for that item for Venator at least. Same can be said with Lash. He could also buy Restorative Shot if he wants to. And then we have this lane here. You have some decent amount of poke with a Calico, with a Paradox, and you have a Haze. The Haze could go Restorative Shot or Rapid Fire, wherever she desires. But the idea is you need to know who you're playing into so you're able to stay in lane longer. Basically, when you're going back to base from the lane, because you don't have that sustain built in, you're losing souls, you're losing time to do things, and you're just losing pressure in the lane. If you have two laners versus one because your teammate had to go back to base, they have the advantage. They can either do a double dive onto the single person, or one of these players could split off and roam to a different lane. This adds a whole different amount of different factors that can attribute to a team winning or losing the match. So again, in layman's terms, if you're playing against laners that want to do a lot of damage, they want to poke super aggressively. Again, if you're playing against characters like Apollo, like Silver, or just characters that just want to poke and be super annoying, this is when you start looking for your defensive items. Your Resto Shot, like I said, your extra regen, healing rights, or grit, whatever the case may be. These are the times you want to be looking for said items. Yes, you're like, oh no, I want to build my first damage item. Trust me, it's a lot better in the long run just to go for a little bit more sustain, because Resto Shot, for example, I'm going to keep coming back to this, gives you some of your gun investment, but it also gives you the ability to stay alive as well as giving you weapon damage, so it's one of the better sustain items in lane right now, as of I'm recording this. I think another thing to keep in mind is sometimes some lanes are predetermined, and it's out of your control if you're going to win or lose the lane. For example, if you're playing against two super superior laners, like an Apollo plus something else, usually you're going to end up losing that lane based on the amount of early game pressure they have. And in that instance, this is your mid lane. You never necessarily want to cross this line, because this is essentially setting up for you to die, is in layman's terms, is that if you cross this line and you're playing against, let's say, Apollo, it's going to be really hard for you to do anything once you're on this side, because they do so much early game poke. Basically, you're going to be on the downside, or the underside, the underdog of the laning phase. And basically, the lane is always going to be pushing into you. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If you're playing against like an Apollo plus a really good laner, that's just how it goes. What you want to do is try to mitigate the bleeding and try to sustain your best. That's why we look for those items in the early game. Now, before we carry on a little bit, I do want to go over a little concepts of freezing the wave. So there's a big concept when it comes to, I guess, MOBAs in general, and that's freezing. So freezing the wave is stalling the minions out, essentially, like so. Basically, all you want to do is last hit. So once a minion is extremely low on HP, then you go for the hit. You want them to get whittled down by the tower or by other minions until they're extremely low on HP, so that they're just one tap away. This allows them to stall out and come to your lane slowly, and it's basically a way to secure souls for yourself and trying to deny enemies at the same time. For example, this team, this Apollo and Abrams, could freeze the wave here, resulting in the Shiv and Dynamo being at a strategic loss in terms of souls. You might be saying, how? They're in range to get souls. But when you're thinking about this, you have to think about the long term. Every 30 seconds, a new minion wave spawns. So these minions are going to come in, they're going to walk up, and they're going to have these other minions here as well. So it's just going to stall the minions under this tower. And what this allows is essentially the Apollo to Abrams to have pressure, because if these guys want to walk up, they have to inch towards their tower. And when they're in a position like this, and there's priority in mid lane or other lanes, these side laners and mid laners can look for ganks, because now they have all of this room to work with on the map. So all of this could be just a question mark if somebody's missing. Or you take a TP across and go for a gank like so. This is why freezing can be seen as a good idea. It's also extremely helpful if, let's say, one of these two get extremely low on HP and you don't want said laner to lose a ton of souls, so the one person will essentially freeze the wave under tower, only going for last hits, so that when the second laner comes back, he's not missing a ton of souls. Maybe he misses one, maybe two minions, but he's not losing the entire wave, and this guy isn't necessarily getting all these solo. So it is sometimes a really good idea to go for a freeze. But essentially, what you want to do is go for just a last hit, so you only want to use auto attacks, so your primary attack. And you also have to consider the minion count. To hold a freeze perfectly, you need roughly 3 to 4 extra enemy troopers. And if the enemy wave is too large, the minions will crash into your tower, which ruins the entire freeze. As well as tanking the minions or tanking the troopers allows you to take all the damage to yourself. You are taking a lot of damage, but your Guardian isn't taking damage and it's not doing damage to the other wave, which is also a good idea. Like I said, when exactly you want to freeze the wave is when you're losing the lane, falling behind souls, or need a safe area to farm near your base. But the risk is that freezing sacrifices map control. It gives the enemy team freedom to rotate, gank other lanes, or take neutral objectives elsewhere on the entire map. That's why, as I was saying, the risk is you're kind of locked now to your tower or to wherever you're freezing the minion wave, right? So Abrams and Apollo, you're locked here. Whereas you have your Dynamo and Shiv, they can do their tier 1 camp, they can rotate to mid lane, or they could TP and go to the other lane. That is all the risk reward. The reward is that Abrams and Apollo, they're catching up on souls, they're freezing the wave, they're, giving a little uneasiness or unrest to the enemy laners. But the risk essentially is you can have all of this other opportunity of roaming around the map, and these two can't really do anything because they'll be losing a ton of souls and it's getting super far behind. That's why freezing at certain times is a really good idea. If you know you're in a losing lane, freezing is definitely a decent option. If you know you're just gonna lose it, again, like an Apollo or something, it's worth sacrificing that little bit of map control so you can safely farm, because farm at the end of the day is a super big priority. And being able to sustain and be on par with the enemy laners at all times is generally the best rule of thumb, trying to stay on the same amount of souls as the enemy team. Of course, it's easier said than done. Now, the other concept is shoving the wave. It's essentially killing the enemy minions as fast as possible, securing the souls, and shoving your wave to the tower. Basically, this is giving you lane priority. It's essentially, you have to think of it as the inverse of freezing. You're the one pushing it all in, and essentially forcing the freeze or forcing it into the enemy team as quickly as possible. Basically, this is only really necessary when you want to look for a roam or at specific timers. Those timers, of course, in this game being 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and 5 minutes. And of course, later on, it'll be 12 minutes with earn and so on if you've made it to that point in the game and you are still in the laning phase for whatever reason. But it's pretty self-explanatory. 2 minutes is your tier 1 camps. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Your 4 tier 1 minion camps around the map. Basically, you're shoving the wave in to get priority so that you're able to safely and quickly farm your camp. This in turn allows you to get the farm safely, and because you shoved it in, the wave that is coming to you after the 30 minutes will be pushing back into you and going into a neutral fight. so that you have enough time to farm safely, come back, and you're just in time to collect your wave. Sometimes it's not a good idea to shove at certain moments, but the idea is you shove it in, you get your farm, and then by the time you get your minion camp, the wave will be back at this position. Because sometimes if you don't shove, your minions might be slowly pushing into the enemy's tower. And at that point, your minions might be at this position, while the enemy minions are at this position. That means you have to walk up past this midpoint to guarantee you get your own soul orbs that you need. And by doing so, when you walk up past this, you're susceptible to, ganks or other external factors that could lead into you getting picked or ganked or whatever the case may be. That's why it's a good idea to pressure and shove in and then farm. That's always the best course of action, regardless of what anybody says. Shove, then you do your boxes, then you do your camp. Shove, then you do, of course, go for the buff. So next we come to ganking, and I think ganking is probably the hardest concept to understand, at least in my opinion, especially in the laning phase, because it's determined by a lot of different factors of wave positioning, the enemy's positioning, and just if boxes are up or not. So I truly believe the best time to go for ganks and go for roams is around the 3-minute mark. Basically, what you're doing is you're sacrificing your soul, your split of the souls, with the other person, the other laner, to go for a gank. And I think it's best at the 3-minute timer, like I said, because you're able to roam around, collect boxes, then go for a gank. But you have to understand where the enemy team is positioning, where the waves are positioned in each and every lane. That's why the laning phase concept is extremely difficult to grasp, because you have to, understand a ton of external factors. So for example, because this mid wave is shoved in so hard right now, the entire wave is collapsing into their tower, or shoving into their tower, crashing, however you want to describe it. You have the option of Graham, Viper to go and roam. They could either look left lane or they could look right lane, depending on how they want to play the game. But you also have to factor in, what can you roam into? What can you gank into? You still have to think about the concept of, can my laner win against XYZ? Because you might be playing passive in your own lane, that means you might not be necessarily be able to go off and perform a really good gank. Like I said, because it's box timer, this is the time you want to go for a gank. In this instance, this Rem isn't really doing anything impactful for the team right now. Yes, they pressured, got the minions up to the tower and doing poke damage, but what you could be doing in this instance, if you're the Rem for example, is going for a roam and heading over to the right lane, and maybe helping out to your Apollo, or maybe go to your left lane and helping push out your left lane a little bit more. These are things you want to be thinking about. You don't need to sit on top of the tower because you're losing time. Rem, for example, is a character that wants to roam around. Help out the team, do your boxes, do your underground boxway, and path around the map. There isn't really a need or a necessity for you to sit in lane. Again, this is an MM match. In scrims, it might be a little bit different, more coordination, but generally speaking, when it comes to early game fighting, numbers are a major factor. If you have 3 versus 2 in a lane, a quick gank can easily turn the whole lane into your own favor. But if not timed correctly, you could just be sitting there splitting souls 3 ways and losing souls for your carry, more so than you realize. This is why you need to understand with the concept of going for ganks, it's kind of going for a hit and run idea. The hit is that you're planning, you're going across the map, hitting boxes while you roam around, and then going for the gank. So the hit part, like I said, trying to get the pick. If you don't get the pick, then you get out, because you don't want to continuously share souls or split souls 3 ways. So being able to roam around quickly, go for the gank, like I said, extremely fast, and get out extremely fast is what makes ganking so valuable, because it allows you to get that little bit of soul lead that you might need in lane. Now, I think another big concept that I see a lot of players make is that they think if you lose laning phase, the game is over. Now, I won't say that's necessarily wrong. Sometimes, depending on who you're playing against in lane, if you die and feed a ton, it could be a problem, especially if it's a character that gets stacks, like, for example, a Drifter, a Vindicta, a Mirage, if they get super far ahead, can be a serious problem. But it's not the end of the world. You still have the ability to do tier 2 camps, roam around, you still have the earn fight, you still have everything else that can contribute into gaining that advantage back, but it'll just be a little bit harder because you have to overcome the hurdle of XYZ is fed. That's the only thing. Another big thing is that a lot of people get, especially in lower ranks, get addicted to their tower and think it is everything they need. It is everything they need. It is their trophy. Their only sole option is to control the tower and nothing else. I want to tell you that's wrong. Sometimes giving your tower to free up space is a good idea, especially in a lane, a losing lane. A lane that has a significant amount of pressure and you can't do anything about. It's okay to give up your lane or give up your guardian. It's never worth you yourself dying for the guardian, because when you die, especially at the guardian, you're losing time. Time results in you not being able to farm as quickly, you not being able to roam around the map and get ganks in, you not being able to do XYZ, all of the other outcomes. That's why the guardian might not necessarily be the biggest thing you have to worry about. I think people that get too addicted to their tower and trying to keep their lane alive will honestly lose the games because you're not being super impactful to the team. Yes, it's nice to have this little bit of a lane advantage or priority, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, especially depending on who you're playing against, because you're going to be wanting to have your solo or your M1 take the solo lane and just, carry the game. So if I skip ahead a little bit, for example, see that the tower is gone on this left side? It's not the end of the world. It's whatever. Like, yes, if you look at this lane, left lane, you have a Billy on 9.9 souls, you have a Lash on 8.6, but you have a Bebop and you have a Drifter on even souls. That means that even though these two won their lane, they're at a disadvantage because they're not really doing anything with that. You can see that the Billy is just under tower. Right? I mean, I guess they lost their tower, but you kind of get the concept of, like, yeah, they lost the Guardian, but it just doesn't truly matter because essentially the wave is going to be slow crashing into them under Walker pretty much all the time, and they lose a lot of lane priority and just ability to roam around the map because they're stuck now with having to deal with all this cleanup. That's why it's like, Guardians or whatever, yeah, you can catch it, but it is still a hassle to keep coming back over here and trying to collect the wave each and every single time it crashes up to the Guardian. Yeah, you have a lot of camps and stuff to adjust with, but it doesn't truly matter because eventually someone's going to get the Guardian and it's just not going to be the end of the world. So I think you need to understand that sometimes you have to give up the tower and there's just nothing you can do about it. If I back up a bit, see just what I'm talking about. So when you look at this lane state, and I go to the Bebop, for example, the HP of the tower is low. The Billy could walk up, essentially. He could walk up and try to play under the tower a little bit. But you have your Lash going back to, reset. You have two laners that are healthy, your Dynamo, your Bebop, that are healthy in lane, and they're getting tower. The Billy walking in, dying to maybe save the Guardian for its little sliver of HP, if it had a little bit more HP, just an example. Him walking back up here, regardless of whether he saved the tower or not, and dying is just a bad overall cause. Because if you die, like I said, you're losing time to do everything else around the map. So sometimes it's your best interest to just let the Guardian die and then just walk away until you have that lane pressure back. I think time and time again, you see a lot of people fighting until the last breath to keep their tower alive. And I think you need to drop the concept of your tower means everything to your tower is just a means of you being able to buy at a more, favorable spot, being a little bit further up, which again, isn't the end of the world and isn't a super necessity to the rest of your team. So if you just keep those things in mind, it'll be a great major help. Now, at the end of the day, if you didn't like all of that yapping that I just did, here's the little bit of a takeaway of how to win your laning phase. If you're playing against a super poke heavy lane, you want to think about items like restorative shot, extra regen, healing right, the sustain items that will allow you to stay in lane longer to be collecting the minion waves as so. If you find yourself in that position, it's okay to freeze the enemy wave onto your tower if you know that it's a lane you're going to be losing. In order to freeze the wave, you need to have at least 3 or 4 troopers still alive in that one phase, and you only want to be last hitting them and using no AoE spells so they don't lose a ton of HP. In doing so, it will allow the enemy or the other trooper waves to stack up and you'll slowly get farm. However, that does bring in a risk reward factor. The reward is it's frozen and you're getting souls safely. The risk is that you're allowing the enemy laners to freely roam around the map because they no longer have to force you in those neutral fights in the middle of the lane. So those are all things you want to consider when you're thinking about freezing the wave. The other idea is shoving the wave. When do you want to shove the wave? Typically you want to shove the wave at the specific timers, that being 2 minutes for the tier 1 minion camp, 3 minutes for boxes, and 5 minutes for the buffs. In order to shove the wave, you have to kill all of the enemy minions as quickly as possible to shove up your own wave into the enemy guardian. And by doing so, that allows you to go and get your camp, go and get your boxes, or go and get your buff, because by the time they kill all of the minions, the other troopers spawns, and the wave will go back to being neutral, just in time for you to come back to wave and collect all of the souls so you don't miss any. Following that, you don't need to hug your guardian. Your guardian, it's a nice thing to have, keep alive for a while, but at the end of the day, if you're in a losing lane, you know you're going to lose the guardian. You never want to die for it, because when you die, you lose the ability to roam around the map, get souls, get boxes, help out teammates, and when you're dead, you're at the respawn screen, you can't do anything. If you're going to lose your guardian, just give it up, don't die for it, is a big concept a lot of people don't really think about. Lastly, talking about ganking. When do you want to gank? Typically, I suggest people going for ganks when it's around the box timer, so 3 minutes. Because if you're ganking and there's no boxes, you're losing souls, you're losing the wave, pre 3 minutes. When you're going for ganks, essentially, it's the same thing for going for boxes. You shove the wave into the enemy tower, then you'll do your box route, and you might end up in a different lane and try to help them out. But you want to think of it as a hit and run. Hit the lane as quickly as possible, do as much damage or get the kill as quickly as possible, then quickly get out and cycle back to your own lane. Because the longer you're in your teammate's lane, the more you're going to be splitting souls 3 ways, which is not the best option. So being able to rotate around, hit the lane, get out, rotate back is the best course of action. Like I said, I like to do it at 3 minutes because that's when boxes are spawning, because this allows you to, while you're roaming and looking for a gank, you're still passively and actively collecting souls, so that you're still losing, souls in the lane, but you're not losing a ton that is super significant to you because you're still hitting boxes and everything of the sort. But you still want to push in the wave. That's essentially what it boils down to in laning phase, is understanding the concept of pushing the wave and freezing the wave, and how passive or how active you want to be in lane depending on who you're playing as. But hopefully this video has helped you in any way, shape, or form. If it has, let me know in the comments down below. And of course, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new. As always, it's one of the best ways of helping out. And become a YouTube member. It allows you to gain some access to Deadlock or even Marvel Rivals coaching, whatever the case may be. But anyways, I hope you have a great and safe day, and I'll catch you in the next one.